My sister has seen and felt all sorts of invisible beings, household spirits, and so on since childhood. Recently, she says that someone resembling a large cat lives in her apartment and walks softly on her legs at night. It prevents her from sleeping. There are no pets in the house. I have never seen or felt anything like this, and mostly I didn't believe her.
I thought she was just imagining it all. When I started taking the course, I began to hear strange sounds sometimes. Anton, can some invisible beings really be around us? And what is better to do when you start seeing or hearing something like that?
In fact, the world is full of inorganic beings, and the only thing that saves us is the constraining structure and very limited perception. People with a broader, higher spectral perception for various reasons, some from birth, some after trauma, and some after very vivid events in their lives, experience it differently. But they immediately begin to perceive these forms, other forms of consciousness, other forms of living beings that do not have a distinctly material body, but which live quite peacefully in our space. And as a practitioner, it is enough to look into the space of the second gates, to express your intention for contact with inorganic beings. You simply won't be able to throw them out of your dreams, and they will even try to intrude into your life. If you don't want to contact all of this and wish to shield yourself from these processes not by limiting your attention or degrading your senses, but simply by clearing the space around you, then you need to open the first gates as wide and as fully as possible, releasing the form of consciousness that exists there not just in your field, but in the space you are in, and all the inorganic will simply be blown away from this space like the wind.
If it's clear how to communicate with people in a certain state, what to do if suddenly a dog attacks or barks on the street? I once had a case like that. I passed by the dog many times. It was calm, but one fine day it lunged, started growling and barking. In general, it left me in a rather unpleasant mood after that incident.
Such situations mainly arise when a person is moving in a very questionable direction. When a person absorbed in their own thoughts, reflections, internal dialogue, and emotions begins to shrink and spasm. For the person themselves, this process is imperceptible because it is happening within them. It is clearly visible from the outside, but the person themselves does not notice it. It's like when you get engrossed in something, for example, you don't notice how time flies. Or when you are swimming and splashing in the water, you don't notice how you cut your leg. And here it is the same. When a person becomes very engrossed in something, they do not notice how they begin to crystallize and tense up. And if they have any claim to development, to evolution, then reality pulls them back at that moment. The dog was at that moment a guide of the spirit, which pulled away from the process called crystallization. Well, the fact that all of this was elevated to a degree of terrible fear and dreadful horror, these are already questions for one's thinking, for one's mind. In other words, the mind cannot withstand such interaction. A sense of self-importance, pride begins to generate all sorts of absolutely unnecessary things for life. And from this arises a complex, or stress, or such internal fears. This is an activity exclusively of thinking, of the brain. It is all subject to restoration, it is all subject to reprogramming, but it needs to be done. By itself, it can only worsen. Therefore, there are different approaches. Again, one can influence their thinking through physics and through energy. I naturally choose the path through energy because it is the fastest and most acceptable for me. Approaches can come from any side. This is fundamentally basic. If you look at this situation in essence, there was a tendency towards crystallization, towards compression, and the dog simply pulled out of this tendency and distracted the entire mechanism from all of this.
Anton heard and decided to ask. Have been doing breathing practices every day for 6 months. Wolf breathing, holding on the exhale. For the first 2 months, it felt like an icy stream was flowing down my back. I was shaking all over. Then it passed. I decided that this is how the channels are cleansed. Now the same chilling cold is in front.
It's terribly cold. It's been 4 months already. Could this be a manifestation of the second attention body? I can see well, but I feel the energy's worse.
Yes, basically the same processes. I don't know the spiritual wolf, what kind of practice it is. I've never encountered it, but if it has an effect, then it's a good practice. Our physical body, in the overwhelming majority of cases, perceives the influx of pure consciousness as cold. When the channels expand and relax, more energy flows through them, and there are very fine channels in our body through which pure consciousness also flows. And all of this is felt as consciousness. Accordingly, the channel runs through the spine while the lamp runs along the front of the body, which duplicates the central channel where the energy of intention flows. And the energy of intention is nothing other than pure consciousness. Oh, it can also be very cold. The other thing is that our physics gets used to this, And to achieve the same effect again, the intensity needs to be increased. So the intensity increases, the body feels cold, some time passes, the body gets used to it, and you feel nothing at all. Then you practice again, invest more, and increase the intensity again. Again, the body feels this chill, and it's not just a chill. There is also heat, cold, vibration, sound effects, and visual effects. There are many effects. The more effects there are, the more effective the practice. As for the fact that I see well but feel poorly well, it's how you have set your priorities. In practice, that's how it works. Some emphasize seeing while others focus on feeling. For me, for example, it's much easier to feel this energy. It's simpler for me, so that's how I set my priorities. And if I really need to, I will certainly see it. This is not something fundamental. What's important is that it all is applied, used, and becomes an integral part of life. Not that you get up from the chair after practice and immediately forget everything.
Emotion is a tool, and you can play with it in different ways. But if you reject emotion, you can no longer use it.
I often used anger and sexual passion, and my will was sustained by that. If I decided to run in the mornings, I ran for many years, and it didn't matter if it was rain or snow. Nothing was an excuse not to do what I had decided. Gradually, anger and passion brought more and more problems, and I gradually gave them up. Now I can't express my will. It seems that a few years ago, I was a different person. Now I'm a miserable piece of shit. I mean, I'm aimlessly floating in the hole. Question.
Can these emotions be returned? It seems like progress. I'm not angry at anyone and I'm not cheating on my wife. But there's this unpleasant side effect. How can this be resolved?
This is actually a quite serious question because the essence of our consciousness being in the material world is to completely become disillusioned with it, to completely lose the meaning of what is happening. Therefore, everything we strive for here eventually becomes absolutely uninteresting to us. The most interesting thing about this process is that when a person remembers themselves as a child and what they aspired to as a kid, well, for example, watching cartoons, playing with toy soldiers, folding something out of paper, that is, everything we aspired to in childhood becomes completely devalued and uninteresting after some time. And now, to imagine myself in that state, it's incredibly boring. That is, no, everything is completely devalued. And a person relates to this normally. Yes, they say I was a child. Well, what do you want from me? As I was little. Well, all children do some nonsense. But when an adult faces the same process, and their great plans to plant a tree, build a house, start a family, and so on, arise, this is generated by society because someone needs it. When he faces the fact that everything he aspired to in his adult life is similarly devalued, loses meaning, and becomes absolutely uninteresting and bland, he starts to question how this can be, how to stimulate himself again, how to motivate himself again. And a person gradually slides into some perversions because it won't work to force oneself to follow the old tracks. One has to turn these tracks into roller coasters and force oneself to squeeze out the remnants of emotions. This shouldn't be done. You need to relate to this just as you relate to your childhood, that stage has passed. These passions are no longer passions. These interests are no longer interesting. These needs are devalued, they are no longer needs. And at this moment, one must be as honest as possible with oneself. What am I doing? I approached the mirror, looked myself in the eyes and asked, what do you want right now? Sometimes the answers to myself ranged from completely primitive and banal to those that for some reason I had forbidden myself. Well, it just somehow happened that I forbid myself. And then I asked myself, why do I forbid myself? After all, if I am going to die anyway, if I am going to end up in that state where most people end up, then what is the point of this prohibition? That is, priests, bandits, and ordinary workers who spent their whole lives at some machine in a factory all lie in the grave absolutely the same. In principle, nothing changes. Yes, you can convince yourself that you must die first and then you will have paradise, or, like in Islam, you must die first and then you will have a harem of virgins. Well, that doesn't suit me because know that if you die, it's the end. That is, I don't have this system of self-soothing called an infinite number of reincarnations. There are no reincarnations. That is nonsense. When a person finds themselves in such a situation, they need to be honest with themselves and say that that's it. Yes, everything I aspired to, everything that was interesting to me before is no longer interesting. I have played enough of it. There is no longer any meaning in this. And little by little, loosen up and let yourself do what is still interesting. To do it as quickly, cleanly, and efficiently as possible, precisely cleanly. Meaning there is no need to engage in any self-torment, just to let it all pass cleanly. to quickly and effectively squeeze out the remaining passions. That is, to finish what you want to do, but for some reason you forbid yourself from doing it. And when a person fully realizes all their passions, fully realizes them, not rejecting them, but precisely realizing them, then they have a real opportunity to free their consciousness from such crystallization of the material world. But that's already a completely different story, and it can't be told in 5 minutes.
Yes, it is quite clear that these toys have become uninteresting. But at the same time, I have lost my will. I cannot maintain any asceticism, let alone quit smoking. It is clear that the will based on passions and anger is somehow not right, ugly, spasmodic, unconscious, but it existed. How to find it again in a pure, conscious way?
There is a universal answer to this question, and it is love. It allows one to move purely and consciously. The other thing is that if this love is directed towards an object in the external world, absolutely anything, from luxury items to one's own child, if it is love for something in the external world, it will sooner or later fade away. It is impossible to love something in the external world forever, but this is simply an obvious fact. One way or another, it is just postponing the inevitable. If the object of love is in the external world, it will eventually fade away. There is another way, another approach. This is an intention beyond one's capabilities. When a person chooses, that is, does not seek the truth, does not seek the present, does not seek the truth, but instead chooses an intention beyond their capabilities, it can be any intention at all, and moves towards it. This is a very selfish, very personal, and very deep process that should not be allowed for anyone at all, because any attempt to consult about what I should intend leads to the same situation where you want nothing, where there is no motivation. But if you honestly give yourself the opportunity to want something, and if that something is far beyond your capabilities, and if it resonates with the area of sincerity, and resonates with the area of the heart, and resonates with the intention itself, and you start to move towards it, then the motivation will be enough for you for many, many decades to come. Have such an intention. It is incredibly distant from my capabilities. It is beyond the horizons of the universe. And I have been moving towards this intention, towards the realization of this intention for 20 years. I always have enough motivation. I always have enough to apply effort, will, intention, and all other types of energy. Searching for intention in something understandable, in something where there is already skill and experience, won't work. It won't succeed. Because simply there won't be enough motivation, and an enemy called clarity appears. And this enemy called clarity creates a situation where a person simply refuses to move. Well, it's clear to him he's not interested, he doesn't want to do it anymore. No one goes to the first grade and finishes it with excellent marks. Well, it's obvious that any average adult can go and easily outshine all the first graders in knowledge. No one does this because it's not enjoyable, there is no achievement in it, there is no pleasure in it, there is no value in it. It's the same here. If the intention is chosen within the realm of possibility, you won't move towards it as much. You'll say yes, and everything is so clear there, it's not interesting. If this intention is located where it's even unclear how to think about achieving it, that is, you simply want it, and that's it, and you have nothing else in your hands. This can create conditions for a sufficiently pure manifestation of will for many years. Well, and still love. Love is universal. The answer to any question. The other thing is that not every person is capable of taking advantage of such an answer.
My daughter is about 30 years old. She recently had surgery on her spine to remove a hernia. How can this illness be explained from the perspective of psychosomatics?
Is it possible to restore the energy flow that passes through the spine? What methods?
Well, if we rule out a regular injury as an option and consider exclusively the accumulating constricting structure that led to the hernia, then in psychosomatics, this is when a person takes on a burden that they cannot carry, which ultimately breaks them. In principle, the thinking of the modern woman is quite favorable for taking on such a level of burden, under which the feminine energy, which is quite complex for a person born in a female body, was not considered. Therefore, one must be able to delegate their tasks and solve problems effectively, not do everything independently, learn to negotiate effectively, learn to distribute the load within the circle of interactions in which she is, perhaps, and efficiently, family situation. That is, it is precisely because a person takes on too much and tries to pull what was not originally intended for them to carry.
Anton, have you had students who were able to fully open their hearts on their own? The more effort and attention I put into my heart, the more situations arise around me that distract this attention.
Apparently, it has to do with habitual thinking and environment. There is a feeling of some resistance from all sides, increasing proportionally to the efforts made. I started to doubt that I would be able to open my heart on my own without getting caught up in everyday matters.
But the question is actually very deep and serious. I don't even know how to answer it in a couple of minutes. Yes, I have had people who independently reached a state of an open heart. And in most cases, the conversation started with the fact that we finally understood what you were talking about. Or with the fact that I didn't understand when you said that opening the heart is painful. There are such people. It is really possible to do. And as for the world resisting, of course, it will resist. But that is not resistance. When a person opens their heart, their resourcefulness sharply increases, and immediately parasites come to this resourcefulness, and they start to parasitize. If a person has a weak psyche, they accordingly get torn apart, they are pulled apart, they feel emotions, they experience feelings, they are simply drained. Accordingly, when a person is drained, they may become aggressive, depressed, and again close themselves off in a constricting structure. See, opening the heart is not just pressing a button. Love and the energy that flows from it, felt as a fire in the heart, is not an energy that can be controlled by the brain, by thinking. It can be controlled. Love cannot be made. It is precisely the state of the person themselves, the state of their physical being, the state of their psyche, the state of their energy. It is altogether a conglomerate of wholeness and unity. Therefore, such a formal approach to these practices gives only temporary formal results until the next irritant. And that's it. And all of this, of course, rolls back onto old tracks. I once mentioned aloud that heart practices are practices of care. And some of the practitioners were frightened by this. There is no need to be afraid of it. It is not dying, it is care. Care is when we cease to be interested in the external world. That is, the external world stops being interesting to us. We enter a state where the number of irritants in the external world rapidly decreases, and the amount of interest in the external world rapidly decreases. Thus, the external world can no longer turn us into its food. The more a person's heart is torn away, the more contenders there are to feed off of it. And if a person does not possess skills such as impeccability, does not possess skills such as ruthlessness, then they become food. They are simply torn apart, like hyenas with their prey. And that's it. People are quite cruel in this regard. They will not stop just like that. And when a practitioner finds themselves in this situation once, twice, maybe 3 times, they start to think and ask very important questions. How is that? And there are very correct answers to this. One needs to cultivate ruthlessness and impeccability within oneself. But this conversation is not for 5 minutes, and one should not confuse ruthlessness with cruelty. These are completely different states. This is a state that I am hinting at through phrases like, let people be who they are, don't interfere with their lives. And when a person starts to not interfere with the lives of others, then other people lose the ability to pull a person out of a state of love. But as long as a person is not yet sufficiently stable in their psyche, yes, that's right. It is very easy to pull someone out of a state of an open heart. By the way, such words are attributed to Jesus Christ, that love your enemy. More or less, that's the point. That even when seeing the face of your enemy, it should not be a reason to lose love. That is, your love should be absolute and unconditional. This is actually a very long topic for discussion. There are many various nuances, situations, and moments in life. But basically, I have, in principle, covered the core of it all.
I realize that the concepts of consciousness and mental energy are not entirely clear to me. I would appreciate your explanation once again. The second question is, how to provide help and support to a departing loved one, an ordinary earthly person who understands themselves as a physical body.
I do not use the term mental energy. But if I were to explain the terminology I use in this context, consciousness is the original energy that emerged, which became the primary cause of everything, which endows any organism, any structure with the process of awareness, that is, comprehension, study, observation, perception. And consciousness is the purest, the most fiery, the most dynamic, naturally, originally. In my tradition, originally it is Shiva, which divided into Shiva and Shakti, and then further began to divide into various forms. And it is precisely consciousness as such, as a form of energy, that is present in absolutely any living being. And in little bananas, and in little tomatoes, and even in stones, consciousness can also be applied. It is just very, very, very slow. And energy. Energy is also consciousness that has already transformed into some kind of structure. For example, there is plasma as a form of energy, and there is water as something already structured, and there is ice which can even be broken, an even harder structure, even slower, and the form of this pure consciousness. And one way or another, if we take, for example, iron in the form of plasma and air in the form of plasma, they will be practically indistinguishable, because the closer you go into the carriage, the more everything becomes the same. That is, there is no difference at all. This is the peculiarity of the original perception, that there is absolutely the same. That is, there is no other object that one can desire. We have division, we have various forms of manifestations. Energy centers, 5 original qualities: will, intention, love, sincerity, conscience. Energy centers, the first elements, are all already a form. That is, they are already structured. But they also consist of consciousness. They are just more extinguished, so to speak, more structured. In the context of my stories, this is how I use these words: to bring it to rest, and not to interfere with him performing this action, the most optimal option. But if you want to create some fuss, you can be near this person with an open heart. You can be near this person with all gates open. You can be near this person with an open fourth energy center as much as possible. You can redirect his focus of attention to the original, to Shiva, to the cause of all creation, to God in any way if he is inclined to this. If he is not inclined to this, it will only irritate him. That is, he will start to resist instead. Therefore, the most optimal option is to simply leave him in peace. And if you still want to do something for him, you need to ask the person himself, what do you want me to do for you? Instead of being clever and inventing things. It is obvious that on his deathbed, the last thing a person will remember is what he refused in this life. It is very hard to remember this, right now while we are alive and healthy and there are no signs of dying yet. Yes, you walk around saying, oh, I forbid myself this, I forbid myself that. Yes, it's immoral. Yes, it's unethical. Yes, this and that. And when you are already on your deathbed, when you realize that life is over, oh, how painful it is to remember what you forbade yourself. Therefore, as an option, one can simply allow this person to fulfill at least some of their whims at the end of their life. But these are all just options. There is nothing true. Free will is free so that one does not stumble over truths every time.
You once mentioned that you have a ban on joy. I could never understand why I always face consequences after I genuinely feel joy. Is it possible that this is a ban on losing vigilance?
Then everyone has this ban on joy. That's how the system works. And it's not about joy. It's about how you fix your attention on the outside world. It doesn't matter why you do it. You can do it, for example, out of hatred. You can do it out of envy, but you can also do it out of joy. The same thing. The mechanism is different. It's not about good and bad, but how the system works. When a person fixates on the outside world, they begin to crystallize around that external world. That is, their energy starts to cool down, and they begin to fade. And it is precisely the process of fading that somehow stops. It's not about vigilance. This is ordinary physics of energy, just explaining it in detail. During consultations for about 1.5 to 2 hours, I explain to a person who comes with such questions how it is arranged, how it works, here without all these religious debts, without all those sins and all of that. No, purely technically, as attention goes out into the external world, touches some structure, and automatically, by directing their consciousness there, a person begins to structure themselves as well. Naturally, structuring is a process of cooling down, a process of fading, and at some point this process is cut off. So, it's simply a matter of life and death. Well, can't explain this in 5 minutes, no way. It's quite a lengthy narrative.
I suspected that my kundalini is raised permanently or activates during energy exercises, as I previously practiced energy techniques from another system.
Is it so? How to calm it down? And is it necessary to calm it down? Otherwise, the lungs get irritated during breathing.
Yes, there are breathing practices that can stir up kundalini energy. Mainly, these are holotropic breathings which focus on oxygen poisoning of the body. Well, primarily the brain. And it's not bad that is such a practice. So it's not that the practice is bad, I just know such practices. And it is precisely bringing your body to a critical level that allows the kundalini energy to awaken, because kundalini energy is mainly a stronghold. It is protective energy. And just raising it like that when everything is fine and you are sitting evenly on the couch makes little sense. But it is precisely when you bring your body to some critical states, yes, it can rise quite calmly. And here the question is like, why the hell are you doing this? For what? I mean, you understand it's like I'll go brush my teeth, but while I'm going, to the bathroom, I'll shoot at the ceiling, the wall, the floor, just in case, so everyone knows I have guns. I'll shoot and go. This is approximately how practices related to Kundalini look to me when a person is doing well. The other thing is that if we talk about some strongly altered states of consciousness, about transition practices, about transformation practices, well, yes, there without Kundalini you can't go anywhere. And you need to adjust your body to be able to properly channel this energy through yourself. But this skill is usually developed not by channeling Kundalini through your body, but by doing external practices, thus preparing your body for it. That is, roughly speaking, like in sports. For example, you do a series of exercises to be able to approach a 300 kilogram barbell and lift it over your head. If you train with a 300 kilogram barbell and lift it over your head every day, well, you probably won't be able to lift it. Or maybe 300 kilograms is already normal for you. So you can train more effectively. That's how it is.